not sure exactly when I had my first exposure to Romeo and Juliet. I probably saw spoofs of it on Bugs Bunny or some cultural equivalent, where I would have heard some variations of "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks," or some such cultural touchstone. But the first time I remember actually reading it for a class was junior year of high school, in which our teacher was not particularly shy about pointing out the odd sexual allusions, such as the nurse suggesting that Juliet would fall backward when thou hast more wit. It was in that same class that the teacher noted the one linchpin in the play, without which none of the tragic events would occur. Those all seemed to come together in Friar Lawrence, the only outsider who knew Romeo and Juliet's secrets, who could easily put a stop to the bad coincidences had he only had the guts to speak up and reveal that no, Juliet cannot marry Paris because Juliet is married already. It is on that one choice by the friar upon which all of the tragedies hang. So, does Friar Lawrence come in for some punishment once all is revealed? None that Shakespeare sees fit to tell us about. The closest thing we get is a vague insistence by the prince that some will be pardoned and some punished. Something inside me concludes that in light of the political power that the aristocratic Capulet and Montague families wield in ancient Verona, those feuding families will come away unscathed, while the apothecary, 20 miles away in Mantua, who at first refused but eventually sold Romeo the poison that killed him, will wind up as the scapegoat. And yet there are more coincidences. In fact, a seemingly endless stream of but-fors. For those unfamiliar with the phrase, a but-for is a coincidental impediment, were it not for the friar's fear of losing favor with the Capulets. Romeo and Juliet would not have chosen to hide their love. Let's look at some of them here. Were it not for the fact that Capulet's servant was illiterate and that Capulet had no idea that his own servant couldn't read, that servant would never have been in the position where he had to ask Romeo and Benvolio to read him the names on the invitation list. Were Rosaline's name not on that same list, Romeo would not have crashed the party that night. Were it not for the fact that Romeo never informed his best friends, Benvolio and Mercutio, or his worst enemy, Tybalt, that he and Juliet had married secretly, Mercutio wouldn't have been in the position to defend Romeo's honor in a duel, which eventually killed him and which, in response, led Romeo to kill his unwitting, newly made cousin-in-law, Tybalt. There are a great many more coincidences, the great bulk of which stem from Friar Lawrence's loopy plan to pass Juliet off as dead, an illusion created by having her drink a sleeping potion that makes the consumer seem completely dead for exactly 42 hours. First of all, we have to look past the fact that there is no such potion that stops your breath and your pulse and makes you stiff as a corpse for exactly 42 hours. That's not a coincidence. That's not even science fiction. That's just a thing that Shakespeare made up. But having accepted that such a thing might happen, Friar Lawrence thought that the 42-hour clock would be set in motion on Wednesday night in advance of an anticipated Thursday wedding. If Juliet drank the potion at midnight on Wednesday, she would wake back up around 6 p.m. on Friday, safely exempt from marital obligations by reason of seeming death. So he sent off a message by way of Friar John that would tell Romeo to get back to Verona to pick Juliet up at 6 p.m. on Friday and spirit her back off to Mantua that night. But with the plan in place, Juliet thought that she'd be safe to pretend to be her father's obedient daughter, begging Daddy Capulet's forgiveness and uttering those fateful words, "Henceforward I am ever ruled by you." Well, old Capulet took her up on that offer and pushed up the date of the wedding to Wednesday. Whoops. Suddenly, Juliet has to drink the potion on Tuesday night, which sets the clock in motion for a 6 p.m. Thursday wake-up call. Yikes. Well, maybe that's not quite a deal killer yet. When Friar John brings Romeo the letter, assumedly on Wednesday, at least Romeo will know of the plan and might be alert to any word of Juliet's premature death. Except that Friar John did not deliver the letter on Wednesday. As a good Franciscan friar, he had ministerial duties, including ministering to the sick. And darn the coincidence, a sudden breakout of pestilence among some of Friar John's charges leads to a sudden crackdown on travel from certain infected areas. And suddenly Friar John, trapped, has to sit on his hands until Thursday. Suddenly, there are two overlapping 24-hour coincidences. Either one of these complications would still leave an 18-hour span to maneuver before the 42-hour deadline. But with two 24-hour coincidences, the wedding moved up 24 hours and Friar John delayed 24 hours, the clock has been reset at a point 6 hours faster than anyone can take action. Which means that Romeo hears of Juliet's supposed death from his servant, who is not privy to Friar Lawrence's plan. Romeo proceeds to visit Juliet's tomb not as her hero savior to whisk her off to Mantua, but as a suicidal mourner ready to whisk himself off to whatever ethereal plane of the afterlife that Juliet now occupies. Of course, Romeo is interrupted by Paris, who, like everyone else, was never informed of the R&J wedding and assumes instead that Romeo, the banished Tybalt killer, has returned to desecrate the dead bodies in the tomb of his rivals, the Capulets. Romeo proceeds to make quick work of Paris, and even as he muses over just how lifelike Juliet still is, drinks that potion moments before Friar Lawrence arrives to retrieve the awakening Juliet. And, of course, were it not for the fact that Juliet awakes with her dead husband almost in her lap, Friar Lawrence might have managed to get her out of the tomb before she noticed that dead husband. And if Friar Lawrence were not such an unrepentant coward, he might have stayed with this terribly unstable, impulsive newlywed, keeping her safe until the watchman arrived. But no, Friar Lawrence runs off. Juliet realizes that her groom has killed himself and decides to go to seek for him on that same ethereal plane. And while there is no longer any poison in the vial that Romeo drank from, Romeo, the now serial murderer, does keep a dagger in his belt, and Juliet is not shy about using it. I've lost count just how many things had to happen wrong in exactly the right way for all this carnage to tumble onto the stage. Oh, right, and Romeo's mom dies. That death stems back to the Tybalt killing and the subsequent banishment. Mom was just sad about not having her son around. She didn't even know that he was actually dead. Of course, had she known he had gotten married, she might have stuck around. And that's my quick take on all the wild but-fors and coincidences that make Romeo and Juliet such a slapstick tragedy. I'm sure I've left some out. Anybody out there got any favorites that I've missed? Let me know in the comments below and hit like or subscribe while you're at it. And hey, you can see Breakneck Romeo and Juliet at the Kansas City and Indianapolis Fringe Festivals this summer. It's loads of fun as we go into the Julieverse to work our way precariously through this very treacherous and convoluted plot where everything goes perfectly wrong. If you're not in Kansas City or Indy this summer, you can catch the video of Breakneck Romeo and Juliet online at breakneckshakespeare.com. See you on the stage.